All right. Welcome to the etcdadm office hours. This is February 1st, 2021. Let me share the doc link in the chat. I see Nate Taylor. Nate, I think you reached out. There was an issue that we talked about. It's great to see you in the meeting. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that issue. I don't have anything specific in the agenda. I don't know if Justin, if you have anything. So yeah, Nate, do you want to take it away? You want to introduce yourself or?
Yeah, sure. I'm Nate Taylor, very amateur Go programmer, like not very good, but I can read it and make my own sense and sometimes add things. Looking to use etcdadm with my company in order to help with the deployment of our on-prem Kubernetes clusters. First thing that I had ran into was the difficulty of getting packages. One option is just pushing out a tarball, and I was hoping to try and use package management, and so submitted a PR to ignore trying to grab a package if it already found it. Then Daniel pointed out to me that it handles cleanup too, which I had missed when I had originally started looking at everything. And so after talking, it seems like phases could be a nice way to be able to handle things, skipping the cleanup phase, skipping the fetch phase, things of that nature. So there's an open issue for it. I am definitely interested in helping with it. My biggest concern is time. I have a hard time finding free time for this kind of stuff, and with my lack of experience, I imagine it would take me quite a while to implement phases, especially when we take a look at kubeadm and the systems that they use to implement them. It's definitely more complex than anything else I've done in Go.
Thanks for describing the issue. So yeah, I remember we talked, I think, in Slack around the issue. Also, I'm gonna pull up that I think there was a PR, but I'll pull it up and put it in the doc in a minute. Yeah, we talked about phases. I wonder if maybe there's something some smaller change that could that would be that would sort of unblock this. Justin, do you have any thoughts? So right now etcdadm is pulling, or the CLI, right? The CLI, it uses a dedicated cache, and it looks to that cache to a folder, a specific folder, I think under var cache etcdadm, for a tarball that corresponds to the etcd version that you want to use. If it doesn't find the tarball, it attempts to download it from, I believe, GitHub etcd releases, and then it writes the tarball in that directory. And so then once it's there, then it takes, it extracts the artifacts from there, puts them into opt etcdadm, and so I think yeah, it doesn't support sort of a user provided etcd, but it could, because even today etcdadm, it doesn't really rely on the location of the file, right? It uses a particular location, to run etcd, but I believe that I think this might happen actually during install. It will actually run etcd to verify that the version that it outputs is the one that it's looking for, right? So it's conceivable that a user could use or could place their own etcd, and tell etcdadm where to find it. And etcdadm would be fully capable of checking, okay, is this the binary that I expect, and that's it. But there's that issue of cleanup. But yeah, and in theory, does that sound like is there something? Is there some smaller change, other than phases that will sort of unblock that? I think phases, right? Like Nate was saying, right? It would be a way to allow for cleanup. I'm sorry, I'm a little, I'm kind of cloudy on what the cleanup issue is.
So a little bit more, I had to pull up the code real quick to remind myself. When you do an init, it does some things to make sure that it doesn't need to clean up an existing situation, an existing deployment. But when it gets to the point of looking to unpack the cache and everything like that, what it does is it looks to see if the cache already exists, grab it if not, and then unpacks it into the install directories that you can specify. The default is an opt bin. It does not that logic is not skipped if the etcd binary, the etcd command is already available. One thing that I had done is in a temporary environment where I was testing around, I had compiled what I had submitted as a pull request, and I specify the installer when I do the init to point to where the package management installs the binaries. When it comes time for a cleanup, what happens is that etcdadm attempts the cleanup, but if you don't specify installer, it just looks for the default, and so it skips cleaning up the binaries, which has worked for my needs, but obviously that's not a real solution. But that's just some further information about it.
One thing which might be helpful would be to differentiate between like the install and instances of a service. So for example, like Kubernetes, at least historically, has run separate etcd clusters for main and events, and those can be on the same machine. And so we could sort of imagine that there could be trivially like 3 etcd installations on a single machine. There could be like the system one that you installed using like packages or whatever, right? Like if there's a Debian package for etcd, like maybe you install it and bring up etcd for something completely different outside of Kubernetes, for the sake of argument. And then I might want to run etcdadm to bring up a main cluster, and I'm going to run it again to bring up an events cluster. And so now when I go to remove, say, the main cluster, I don't want to delete the events cluster, and I don't want to delete the software that I installed or that I have cached somewhere. So I don't think that in general etcdadm should be deleting the binaries unless it knows that they are specific to an instance, right? So what would that mean in practice? So like, for example, underneath etcdadm, we could have opt etcdadm main and then bin, which would hold like the current version, and we would literally copy them from the cache, and then we would know that they were owned. But if they were in user bin, for example, we would not be in a delete, or if we would not be deleting them. And if we were getting them straight from the cache, we would not be deleting them because we don't know if someone else is using them. Similarly, like if we have to uninstall a systemd unit file, we would only uninstall our systemd unit file. We wouldn't uninstall like events, or we wouldn't uninstall the system one unless you had actively pointed it to like to the shared, like the primary one that the system installs, or to, I don't know, some flag to say like just clean up everything. I don't know if that helps. So I like what you did with changing the binary paths. I think I'd argue, in general, we shouldn't be deleting the binaries unless we know that they are in a location that is specific to our instance of etcdadm. Does etcdadm have instances today, Daniel, or not?
The notion that there might be more than one.
Yeah,
etcd,
specifically etcdadm, like main and events, for example.
So I think maybe I didn't quite understand.
So for example, I need to look at exactly what I specify on etcdadm. It's been a while.
But yeah, I mean, it assumes that there's just one, that it manages exactly one etcd process, and that etcd process is itself wrapped in a system in a single etcd systemd service. Yeah.
So we could add a notion of if we want to continue to, I don't know whether the upstream project is going to continue to recommend, or whether it even still recommends, splitting main and events into separate etcd clusters. And we could certainly add that notion. If they do, assuming they still do, we could add the notion of like everything default, but just like a second instance called events, right? Or a second instance called Cilium actually is the other use case. Cilium, the CNI provider or network magic thing, also needs, or can, in some modes, you can provide it with an etcd cluster. So there can be actually 3 instances of etcd running on a control plane node in certain configurations.
It sounds to me like what you are saying is that the problem that Nate has raised, which is of, hey, a different let's say different source for, let's say, the etcd binary, and avoiding cleanup if etcdadm didn't install this. It sounds like what you're saying is that is a specific instance of maybe the more general problem of, hey, there might be multiple instances of etcd on a machine. That's a valid use case. etcdadm should support that. If it did support that, it would automatically, or it would necessarily support this use case of well, maybe not necessarily, but it would be a step in in that direction of supporting different different or multiple etcd binaries. Okay.
Prakash here, I just want to give comments. Can I?
Yeah,
so my understanding was that Kubernetes only deals one cluster at a time. And if it is one cluster, it will be only one etcd at a time. However, the responsibility of that goes to cluster API if they want to have multiple clusters and manage it. So is it not that it should belong to the cluster API to invoke those extra etcds rather than doing internally?
I can take this. Like certainly the originally there was one etcd backing a Kubernetes, one instance of etcd backing a Kubernetes cluster. And then I think for performance reasons back in the etcd2 days, the default configuration, or the configuration in the open source Kubernetes project, the kubeup configuration, split that out into 2, this is like very long time ago, split that into 2 etcd clusters. And the idea is that the event objects, which are sort of higher traffic, or like higher throughputs, would go in and actually like don't matter. In other words, if you lose if you lose an event object in Kubernetes, it really shouldn't matter. They only last, I don't know, like an hour anyway, then they get garbage collected. Those would go into a separate etcd cluster. And so there were every Kubernetes cluster that was brought up in this configuration, and then the ones which copied that, and there were strong reasons to copy it because that was sort of the tested configuration. Those Kubernetes clusters would have two etcd clusters backing them. They would have one for event objects and one for everything else. And the Kubernetes API server, for this reason, supports a flag or a set of flags on the command line where you can say, like, these kinds of objects, or maybe this etcd path, goes to this etcd cluster. So there's no guarantee in Kubernetes, for example, that all the objects in your Kubernetes cluster come from the same etcd cluster. And so the most visible effect of this is if you look at the resource version on events, it will not be in the same sequence as the resource version elsewhere. It doesn't matter. It probably doesn't matter, but like there's no guarantee that across on two different kinds, the resource version will be the same because they're not necessarily in the same etcd cluster. And you can actually observe that in most configurations, or in a lot of configurations, I should say, if you look at event objects. I do agree that whatever tool is setting up the cluster should also be setting up etcd in general, unless you want to do an external etcd cluster. But in general, the tool, whether it's Cluster API or KOps or Kind or whatever it is, should do that. I think what we'd like here is that all of those tools should use etcdadm to actually do the heavy lifting of setting up etcd.
Okay, it makes sense then.
And yeah, like I think I like the way you expressed it, Daniel. Like if we address the broader issue, then we like Nate's the challenge that Nate has encountered, it can be seen as an instance or related to that. I think that what's different is an instance of an etcd cluster doesn't necessarily own the binaries it is using in any case.
I do believe that working on supporting multiple instances would, in effect, solve the use case that I was running into. Whereas instead of on doing an init, just immediately going and unpacking the cache, it makes sense to look to see if it's already done. In which case, that covers my use case and the cleanup as well. Ensuring that we're not always clearing up all binaries. So I believe that it's a much better use case to work towards than my own, and it would solve my own at the same time.
I'm trying to recall. So kubeadm doesn't really have the same, I guess, issue because kubeadm, while it needs to deploy control plane components, but it does that by sort of delegating to kubelet, right? It drops manifests that have image tags, and then kubelet says, okay, I need to pull these. And so kubeadm is not really installing or cleaning up, for that matter. You could use the same kubeadm multiple times, give it different Kubernetes versions, and then you'll end up with multiple, or with container images for that span these different Kubernetes versions. So I'm wondering, how can we have that same sort of simple experience with etcdadm? I don't know off the top of my head. Or do we need something like an etcdadm install, and then etcdadm init, for example, will maybe we require, I don't know, then I guess that breaks CLI compatibility if we require then two separate steps.
I'd say it's fine to. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
I think Nate or Prakash was talking.
Yeah, I was going to state that etcdadm has the concept of a cluster, and their configuration files are great for being able to deploy multiple clusters using etcdadm onto the same nodes. And if etcdadm had the same concept of a cluster, I think that, you know, and it's not a cluster in this case, it would be an instance, but you could call it cluster, but it could accomplish the same sort of goal and help with the logic on what to process against and what to clean up.
Yeah, and we don't need to, we can continue to have etcdadm init do the default, whatever we define the default to be. So for example, like default to an instance that we call main, which might just not even have a suffix, or what if we do suffixes, right? You know, default to the standard ports, default to the standard version, and default to like downloading from GitHub. And then we can have options to say like use the OS packages, or use this etcd version, or use this suffix to differentiate in this port type thing. That's fine. I think we can debate which should be the default, right? Should it be OS packages or should it be downloaded? But I think that's, I don't think it needs to. I think we can continue to have the simple experience without ruining the capability to have more complicated options. Okay.
All right. I guess maybe we can like sketch a little more on a GitHub issue, but that seems that Justin, what I really like what you said. I think yeah. Tell me if I misquoting, but like separate init from install, or
separated from ownership. I think like just because an instance doesn't necessarily own the binaries, but it like if it downloaded them, it probably should delete them, and so therefore, unless they're in the cache. So for example, one way to do that would be we download it to a shared cache, which is shared across all instances. We expand those files into a directory that is specific to the instance, so that then the instances are isolated, and if the cache gets deleted, it's not a problem, or if the cache, some copy gets updated in the shared cache, it's not a problem. And so therefore, if there are binaries in my instance that I am deleting right now, and I delete that instance, I should delete that copy of the binaries. So I should clean those up. Obviously, if I'm using the shared OS binaries, I should not delete them because I don't own those, unless I copied the shared OS binaries into my instance, in which case I should delete them, right? So it's like, it's this notion of like, do I own this thing? Is it definitely mine, or is it not mine? And how do these things get cleaned up? And that's what I'd be thinking about.
I see. And it sounds like we could use a location as a proxy for whether we own it or not.
Yeah, I mean, like that's one way. I think the other way is yes. I think actually in a systemd unit file we can put additional like metadata. I think we can put any sections we want in there. Don't quote me on that, but I would probably lean on establishing our own like subtree and saying that like the things in this subtree are owned by this instance. That to me feels straightforward to reason about.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm just wondering how. So let's say if I've got two instances, then if I run etcdadm reset, that applies to kind of the default, the instance that was deployed in the default fashion. And then how do we indicate, or is that just something that we should talk about in the GitHub issue? But I don't know if you have any ideas off the top of your head.
So
how do we distinguish between these instances?
one of the things that I really like the idea of is kind of following along with kubeadm's config file, but maybe taking it a step further. For ease of use, for instance, if somebody wanted to just use the default method and just do an etcdadm in it, my thinking is that we could have, if a config file is not used to init in an instance, that we could drop one with the default settings somewhere, either in etcdadm or wherever, and then actions against that instance can be those can be specified. I want to access against this config file, and that config file would help it know, okay, I have the binaries, I need to clean them up, this is their location. And we could do the same thing, even if the defaults aren't called, even if it's just commands on the command line, we could drop a config file with the commands that were used that overrode the defaults as well.
I like that approach a lot. And then I think, like, I can see there being a, like, suppose I had two instances, one of which was the, maybe this is what you're getting at now, one of which was the like unnamed instance, the default one, and one of which was events. And I wanted to reset etcd events, but I forgot to pass it in. I don't want to like accidentally do that. But what we could, or like, I could see that that's a big foot gun. What we could do is we could recommend to people that they provide explicitly named, if they have multiple instances, they provide explicitly named instances, so that like the default will be some other, some other instance that, but if you wanted to have two, you should probably call them primary and events, or primary and other, or whatever it is, rather than relying on one of them being the unnamed one or the default one, and one of them being one you have to remember to pass the flag on. It's because if you forget to pass the flag, you don't want it to do things.
Yeah, you could have restrictions on name of instance based off of config files that exist, so that we know that it's unique. And then for things like the reset call, if no arguments are passed in, like a warning, this will delete the default cluster. Are you sure? Pass in a config file, if not, a warning of that nature.
Okay, let's I guess I don't know if that that issue, you opened an issue, Nate, for implement phases for the init and reset command. Maybe it's this is a new issue, and we can brainstorm a little bit more. But yeah, this seems reasonable. I'd like to. Yeah, I mean, I would like to also hear, if anybody else, because I guess that, maybe to play devil's advocate a little bit, right? We don't want to add complexity unless there is sort of demand that justifies it. Not so just apart from something being useful on its own, and I agree that this is useful, as an idea, but I also it would help if we if we saw that it would that it would it would be used, because it would, I think it would add complexity. So but anyway, we'll who wants to create, Nate, do you want to create an issue, or should I create an issue, and then we can kind of go back and forth on where to go. But I think we can make progress on this.
Yeah, I can go ahead and create an issue.
Thank you. Excellent. Let's see, apart from that, or actually, I guess I should ask, is that sort of wrap up that topic?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't have anything apart from that. There was Oh, there was another fix PR. To the I think the hack, or I guess is etcd manager. And yeah, I don't know, Justin, did you have any?
I'll take that one. Yeah, I don't know if it matters
Yeah.
for Bash. I presume it doesn't matter for Bash, otherwise none of our scripts would work. There is I do have a vague concern around I'll have to make sure that our copy, so we have scripts that check that the correct headers are on top.
Right.
I'll have to see what's gone wrong. Like, I'll see what's happening here. My guess is that the reason why these are bashy and the reason why the bash is on line 15 instead of line 1 is because we copied them from somewhere else. And I will have to go and see where we copied them from and find out why they did that. And it might just be yeah. But this seems like a reasonable PR. I can certainly take this one, particularly if you want to look at 163.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I will do that.
I will I'll take 187.
Okay. Okay. Oh, and okay, got it. It was blocked on 162, which now merged. Okay. Sorry, I totally missed this.
No worries. You don't have to do it right now. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's follow up on the sort of the multiple instance idea in an issue, and I mean, I think, yeah, I think that's a nice, it sounds like a nice direction to go. Also, just I guess architecturally, also just to separate sort of management of etcd from the idea of managing the binaries themselves, right? Because etcdadm, in theory, all it needs is etcd, the binary of a particular, of the version that the user wants, and where that lives really is not relevant to managing etcd. As long as that binary doesn't get sort of moved or deleted, because etcdadm right now, it does create the systemd service, and that needs to point to the binary. But yeah, as long as that binary is there. Interesting. All right, yeah, let's think about that a little bit more. Okay, that's it.
Can I
for me.
back up?
So Nate,
Go ahead.
So Nate, are you modifying 179 now from phase to the existing what we discussed, or is it still open 179?
I would say still open, and I was going to open a new issue for supporting multiple instances.
So will that be separate or will it be merged?
I would say that it's separate. I think phases are still useful, and so I would personally vote for keeping that open as something separate. But supporting multiple issues is a good goal and probably easier to implement off the bat than implementing phases.
Okay, good.
One thing that I would like to ask about as well, there was a pull request that was opened a little while back for adding renew certificate functionality. And it looks like it was closed as sale. And the last comment on it, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat. The last comment on it was that somebody was going to go ahead and check it. I believe that the original contributor felt like they had addressed everything. And so I was hoping to bring that up and see what we need to do to move that forward. And we can talk about it in Slack as well. It doesn't need to necessarily take up our time here, but something I figured I would bring up.
Yeah. This I think there was one outstanding question about whether Kube API server would need to be, I think, restarted after the rotation, and it wasn't clear. But
it doesn't, and I can comment on the PR if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, I think that let me see, the PR itself, I don't think there are any conflicts, so we should be able to. I mean, I don't know what the. Do we need to reach out to PyTimer, because he did, I guess he closed it.
It was closed for being rotten.
Okay, excellent. Okay, yeah. So then, yeah, we can reopen it. I'll ping him and see if he has if he wants to make any updates. Okay. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I work in a slow environment, and so being able to handle like upgrades and everything is not easy. And so we have automation that renews all of our certificates every week to make sure that we're always good. And so I went to add etcdadm to that and saw this, and I did pull in the PR and mess around with it into my fork and play with it, and it was looking good. So, but I definitely don't want to be running anything that's not upstream.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I will look at this. Yeah, because I agree. It's good functionality. I'm gonna double check to see if kubeadm has sort of changed its approach. Maybe there's something that we can learn, but otherwise, yeah, I think this was in a pretty good state. There was just that question of, do we need to document a caveat for users? But it sounds like, yeah, if you can add that info to the PR, that no Kube API server will be able to just continue.
Okay.
It'll pick up the rotated certificate. I would appreciate that. Okay, I've reopened that, and I'll keep an eye on this.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing it up. All right. I don't have anything else. So maybe in the cluster lifecycle meeting tradition, I will say going once, going twice. All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks.
For attending, for sharing sharing your ideas and feedback, and we will see you hopefully next time around in a couple of weeks.
Sure. Thanks.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.